There are some books that feel less like books and more like thunderclaps. In 1995, Pope John Paul II dropped one of those thunderclaps. It was Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. And this Vatican memo did not collect dust. It was a battle cry, a father's plea, a love letter, but also a warning. He looked at the modern world and asked, are we building a civilization where every person is seen as a miracle? Or are we sliding towards a civilization where people become products and problems to be eliminated? JP2 was a philosopher, a poet, survivor of Nazi occupation in communist Poland, and he'd already been Pope for over 15 years when he released Evangelium Vitae in March 1995. By then, he traveled the world more than any Pope in history and even had seen both the dignity and the brutality of human life. The world he addressed was shifting. The Cold War had just ended. People were hopeful about peace and progress. But at the same time, abortion had become normalized and even celebrated. Movements advocating assisted dying were growing, pitched as compassion, but often driven by fear of suffering or inconvenience. Advances in biotech were just beginning to explode, cloning, IVF, genetic engineering, raising questions no one had seriously asked before. And the United Nations had just hosted the 1994 Cairo Conference on population, which many Catholics at the time saw as pushing abortion and sterilization globally under the banner development. Into that storm, JP2 threw down two unforgettable phrases: the culture of life and the culture of death. Not polite labels, prophetic ones. They still echo in headlines, homilies, and debates 30 years later. So here was his first idea, that life is a gift, not property. He writes that the gospel of life is at the heart of Jesus' message. Every life, unborn, elderly, disabled, or socially inconvenient, has incomparable worth. We live in a world that constantly asks, what do you produce? What do you cost? John Paul flips that. Existence is self, is worthy of all. Life isn't a subscription you cancel because you didn't like the terms. It was crazy holding my daughter for the first time. The thought that struck me was twofold. There was two different things. First, this human life is completely dependent on me right now. She needs me for literally everything. And she didn't ask to be here. Out of my actions, something I did, a life as complex as me suddenly exists. That was overwhelming. But second, and this one tripped me out, it's gonna kind of feel like it came from left field, I realized that even Hitler was once a tiny baby, like the one I was holding in my hand. That's a weird thought to have when you're holding your child. But for Christians and non-Christians alike, Hitler has become the modern symbol of just like absolute evil. And yet, once upon a time, he was just a helpless child who needed his parents. And what struck me, and what I think is crazy, is the church teaches, and I dare say God himself would validate, that even Hitler was given the same freedom to exist on this side of eternity. The right to live is available to everyone in God's eyes. What he chose to do with that freedom, that's like a whole other video. But the baseline remains: life itself, no matter whose life, is a gift. And that gift cannot be revoked by human judgment. That's why John Paul II is so adamant. We don't get to sort lives into keepers and disposables. We defend them all because God gave them all. So the second point that he kind of mapped out was the culture of death versus the culture of life, which is a very famous phrase now. John Paul says a corrupted idea of freedom, I do what I want, plus utilitarian thinking produces a culture that discards the vulnerable. Real freedom chooses the good and protects the weak. Euphemisms are rampant. Abortion is popularly thought of as a choice. Assisted dying dressed up as aid. Language fogs the moral map, and in the fog, the weak start to disappear. John Paul warned about that sleight of hand. And Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, echoed it in the early 2000s, saying, societies that treat truth as relative eventually treat life as negotiable. Bishop Robert Barron has repeated the same point. True compassion doesn't eliminate the sufferer. It walks with them, treats pain, and insists the person is never a burden. But John Paul's voice is pastoral, not vindictive. He speaks to women who've had abortions with mercy. He urges them not to despair and invites them to healing and potentially to become powerful defenders of life. I don't think Pope John Paul II wanted this to be a moment where it was a cultural war, where you were beating your chest and claiming your side. I think he wanted it to be a pastoral field hospital approach. There are moments where mercy matters more than being right. For me, just like bringing it down a little bit, that's driving. I'll be honest, when someone cuts me off, my first thought is not, bless you, brother. It's usually a lot less holy. But I try to pause and remember. I don't know what's happening in that person's life. Maybe there's a rushing to a hospital. Maybe something terrible just happened and they're having a horrible day. I can add fuel to the anger, or I can just take the high road or the slow road. So that's what JP2 mapped out as the culture of life in miniature. Seeing people as people, not problems. So the third thing that he kind of brought out was a blueprint. How we build the culture of life. John Paul doesn't stop at critique. He gives a blueprint, a few answers, some solutions. Families should be sanctuaries of life. Kids should hear that they're wanted. Grandparents are honored. Parishes should preach truth and provide mercy, babysitting, meals for new mothers, counseling, and confession. The U.S. Bishops Walking with Moms in Need program is a direct fruit of this vision. Parishes mapping local resources so no mother feels abandoned. JP2 also talks a little bit about feminism. He kind of coined it the new feminism, where we don't erasure motherhood, but honor the feminine genius that humanizes social life. Many pro-life feminist movements today grew from that seed. We actually have a close friend to Icon Ministry, the Genius podcast. She's in Australia. She's doing great work. Then he spoke about public life. Laws educate hearts. If laws say some lives don't matter, societies start to think that way. So we should work for laws that protect life and build social structures that make choosing life realistic, like decent health care, parental leave, adoption support, and hospice care that treats pain without treating the person as disposable. Here's how I'm trying to do this in my household. So I once heard that if you earn around 100,000 AUD in Australia, you're in the top 3% of global earners. And that completely blew me away. It reminded me that we're stewards of what we've been given. We're not owners. We hold things loosely. And I love the phrase, it always comes up in my mind when we talk about stuff like this, from the womb to the tomb. From first breath to last, we're called to be pro-life. We can't just claim pro-life at infancy. My family tries to live that day to day. Sometimes we donate to charities. Sometimes we help friends who are struggling in times of need. Maybe if it's not money, maybe we can offer our time, groceries, babysitting shifts. Now look, these suggestions aren't headline making, but they are concrete bricks that build a culture of life and can be practical for any household to implement. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. JP2 ends where we ought to begin. Worship. He ties the gospel of life to the Eucharist, the sacrament of love and life. Receiving Christ trains us to revere everybody. Adoration fuels action. Sunday shapes Monday. Think of the family dinner table. You don't just shovel in food, you share it. You learn patience. You pass the salt. You make space for the cranky toddler and the tired parent. The Eucharist is the cosmic version of that. Christ hosts the table, and every person has a seat. If we can learn to revere Christ's body in the Eucharist, we'll learn to revere his body everywhere. And we are the new church. We are the temple. So here's your weekly question. In the next 7 days, what's one practical way that you will make room for life? Will you deliver a meal? Will you volunteer to support your parish's youth program? Maybe call your grandma. And that wraps it up for this episode. I hope that this video was able to make a very big idea, Pope JP2's Evangelium Vitae, a little bit more digestible for a small brain like myself. Have a good week.